The EU brings Moscow to its knees and dictates tough conditions. The army must be dismantled or there will be no peace. The US, Europe, and Ukraine are rewriting the peace plan. Sensational! Ukraine is winning the battle for justice. There will be no amnesty for Russia. Shock, Trump is trapped. Compromising material, wiretapping, ultimatums. The whole world is in an uproar. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Greetings. This is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. The EU has proposed adding restrictions for Russia to the peace plan for Ukraine. The EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, stated that in order to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, Russia must make serious concessions and reduce its military power. This was reported by Politico. According to Kallas, the main focus of any peace agreement should be on forcing Russia to permanently cease its aggression and abandon attempts to change borders by force. She emphasized the EU's principled position on negotiations. We
have one aggressor and one victim. The main focus should be on what Russia must do. The aggressor, not on what Ukraine, the victim, should sacrifice.
She added that the draft plan circulated by the administration of US President Donald Trump did not include any concessions from Moscow. Kallas believes that the agreement must necessarily impose obligations on Russia, including limits on the size of its army and military spending. She warned that without such restrictions, aggression could happen again.
If you spend almost 40% of your total government expenditures on your armed forces, you will want to use them again. And that threatens all of us.
In addition, Kallas emphasized that if aggression is rewarded, it will serve as an invitation to use it again.
If aggression bears fruit, it will serve as an invitation to use aggression again and to use it elsewhere as well. And that is a threat to everyone in the world, especially to smaller countries. And in Europe, there are only two types of countries. Small countries and those that have not yet realized they are small countries.
Kaja Kallas also confirmed plans to accelerate the use of frozen Russian assets to secure a $140 billion loan for Ukraine. Ukraine managed to remove from Donald Trump's proposed peace plan the controversial provision on amnesty, which caused the most concern regarding justice and Russia's accountability. This particular provision was the most controversial and sparked a wave of criticism and speculation in Ukrainian society. This was stated by Ukraine's ambassador to the US, Olga Stefanishina.
I can say unequivocally the issue of amnesty is not included in the final 19 points. This point is not included because it is extremely controversial and concerns the issue of justice.
The removal of this provision means that Russia and its military can still be held accountable for war crimes committed against Ukraine. Stefanishina emphasized that the negotiation process is ongoing, and the next rounds of discussions should clarify the parties' positions on the remaining points of the peace plan. Let us recall that Western media leaked documents containing 28 points, and experts immediately cried out, "This is Ukraine's capitulation." But the political thriller is only just heating up. On November 23rd, there was an emergency meeting in Geneva between the US, Ukraine, and Europe. The plan was being rewritten on the fly. Then Trump backed down, the document was revised again, and that was just the warm-up. The stakes are rising. In the near future, Zelenskyy will meet with Trump to secure all the necessary conditions for Ukraine. Will Ukraine be able to turn the game around and seize the initiative? The latest information about the negotiations is already in our report.
No restrictions for the armed forces of Ukraine, no ban on joining NATO, and much more. The so-called Trump plan, in its original form, no longer exists. According to the Financial Times, it has been reduced by almost a third, but the details have not yet been disclosed. As of
now, after Geneva, there are fewer points, no longer 28, and much has been properly taken into account within this framework. Even now, there is still a lot of hard work for everyone together to produce the final document, and everything must be done properly. And we appreciate that the majority of the world is ready to help us, and the American side is taking a constructive approach.
Sources familiar with the course of the negotiations report that the parties have agreed to continue discussing only issues related to bilateral relations between Ukraine and the United States. Certain topics should be considered in other formats, since the original draft of the document included nuances that did not depend on Ukraine at all. Now, by presenting a united front, Europe and Ukraine have decided to discuss. Each side will address its own issues with the United States, while taking each other's interests into account.
This partnership not only allows us to act together, but it also shows that our shared interests actually create a strong foundation for working together.
At the same time, to prevent leaks, no copies of the new peace agreement were handed out after the meeting, reported Ukraine's first deputy foreign minister, Serhiy Kyslytsya. All copies of the document agreed upon in Geneva were collected from everyone except the heads of the delegations. Nevertheless, some details still leaked to the press as rumors. For example, there was a clear refusal to reduce the number of BSUs at Moscow's behest.
Our European partners made it very clear that Ukraine's sovereignty cannot be discussed at all, nor can any restrictions on the army, or on Ukraine's fundamental ability to freely join any international alliance or defensive pact. These crucial matters also have absolutely no legitimate right to be extensively discussed or debated. And from this particular point of view, it is abundantly obvious that any unreasonable demands, for example, to significantly amend Ukraine's sovereign constitution in order to permanently prohibit it from joining NATO, will ultimately be dropped and dismissed. And it seems to me that these are the main important points.
Another crucial point for Ukraine was the discussion of security guarantees. According to analysts, Washington's representatives managed to convey that such commitments from the Russian Federation mean absolutely nothing. Therefore, the only real guarantees can be agreements with the US and Europe, as well as the unhindered development of Ukraine's own defense industry. And here, for the first time, it was stated that these are guarantees not only for Ukraine, but for the entire continent.
Importantly, in Europe, there is significant and ongoing talk of guaranteeing peace through strength. That is to say, those European countries are now officially and quite openly saying that they absolutely must be prepared to actively fight against Russia, including on sovereign Ukrainian territory, if, after the formal signing of a peace agreement, Russia subsequently violates the agreed upon terms. And this particular moment, it truly seems to me, marks a profoundly significant and truly tectonic shift, because such important matters were absolutely never discussed openly before.
At the same time, the White House believes that the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine were productive, but a few disagreements remain, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said following the meeting. She also said in an interview with Fox News that arms supplies to Ukraine have their limits and cannot be endless, subtly hinting at what might happen to US aid if Kyiv pushes its position too aggressively. However, even when it comes to weapons, things are far from straightforward.
It is Europe that is buying American weapons for Ukraine. They are indeed buying them. And from this perspective, Trump's threats, which were voiced to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, would in fact be a violation of agreements not only with Ukraine but also with Europe about
the loss of multi-billion-dollar contracts and the payment of penalties for breaking them. This is clearly not what Donald is counting on. Meanwhile, the American delegation is already in Abu Dhabi, where several days of meetings will be held with the Russian side. A peace plan agreed upon on Sunday between the US and Ukraine will be presented to the Russian Federation. According to experts, given that Moscow previously stated that they hadn't seen anything and needed to look into the matter, this time the Kremlin also doesn't seem particularly inclined toward constructive dialogue. But
this gives the Russian Federation the opportunity to build a system in which they won't even, so to speak, get involved or consider this plan. In this way, they are trying to keep the initiative on their side and avoid getting drawn into this negotiation process. Because getting involved would essentially mean playing by someone else's rules, by the rules of Kyiv, Europe, and Washington. Once again, Moscow does not want to be in a position where it is being led. And when it is perceived, primarily by the United States, as the key barrier to achieving peace.
however, as analysts say, no one really expects that Putin will agree to terms acceptable to Europe without pressure. And this pressure should primarily come from Washington. Which means the main task is to convince the United States that the peace plan should be exactly like this.
Judging by the fact that the negotiations did not drag on and ended with a friendly dinner, these are clear signals and signs that everything went more than positively, more than well. And as we know, the character is quite complicated. Steve Witkoff, a man who is both extremely wealthy and extremely capricious, would never have agreed. Even, let's say, for the sake of politeness, he simply wouldn't have agreed to have dinner and spend his time if he felt that the results of the negotiations did not satisfy him.
Meanwhile, to ensure that Trump himself did not deviate from the course of peaceful settlement agreed upon at the meeting, the closest friends of the American leader in European politics flew to Washington. Finnish President Alexander Stubb and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who have already demonstrated more than once that they know how to find common ground with Donald Trump. And
Once again, shock. Trump issued an ultimatum to Kyiv: first sign a peace agreement and only then will security guarantees be considered. Meanwhile, dark clouds have gathered over the American president himself due to the scandal involving intercepted conversations at Itkov and Shakov. To find out what is happening around the peace agreement right now, watch the following report. In
the corruption scandal that erupted in Ukraine, known as Mingage Gate, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance saw a window of opportunity. This was reported by The Atlantic. Allegedly, Vance believed that the Ukrainian authorities found themselves in an extremely weak position and therefore would instantly agree to the 28 points, which, as has now been confirmed, were written in Moscow. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports that the new special envoy, Dan Driscoll, who also appeared at Vance's suggestion, was promoting the so-called peace plan among European diplomats by threatening them with the overwhelming power of the Russians, which was ready to be unleashed not only on the Ukrainians.
He said, look, if before Russia was making missiles on the fly and immediately firing them at Ukraine, now the Russians have a stockpile. This is clearly a Russian narrative, and it's obviously not a story coming from Ukraine. It's a story invented by the Russians and handed over as a tool specifically to negotiators close to Vance and Witkoff.
Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry announced that they do not see Europe at the negotiating table for peace in Ukraine. And Putin, in his usual manner, explained when the hostilities would end.
Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they occupy. That's when the fighting will stop. If they don't leave, we will achieve this by military means.
The Americans failed to get the peace plan on Trump's desk by Thanksgiving. But according to media reports, they haven't abandoned the idea and supposedly promised to consider security guarantees for Ukrainians after President Zelenskyy signs the document.
For us, it's unacceptable, first of all, because, well, after almost 4 years of full-scale invasion, for us, this is a completely unacceptable situation, because after 4 years of full-scale invasion and understanding that even with security guarantees, back in the days of the Budapest Memorandum, none of the parties that pledged to uphold them in the event of an attack on Ukraine actually did so. Now they're talking about an agreement without any guarantees that in 6 months, a year, or 5 years, we won't find ourselves in an even more difficult war for Ukrainian society. That's definitely not a sufficient argument. Here, the Americans, if this is true, seem to want to push both sides. But somehow it turns out that they're pushing Ukraine much more actively.
Meanwhile, after the scandal with the intercepted phone conversation between Witkov, Dmitriev, and Ushakov, the White House is pretending that nothing happened. Donald Trump got busy pardoning a turkey.
Are you ready? Well, Gobble, listen, I just really want to tell you something. This is absolutely very important. You are definitely, absolutely in the park here.
Some senators are demanding that Donald remove Witkov, who is literally suspected of working for Moscow. Some analysts believe that the leak of the phone conversations is actually a demonstration of the struggle between two sides for a spot closer to Trump. On one side, Vice President Vance, and on the other, Secretary of State Rubio. By the way, the latter did not react at all to the information about Witkov's conversations, but only to journalists' reports that things are not so smooth and unified within the Republican camp. However, analysts consider it unlikely that Trump will actually punish Witkov.
Witkov is someone from his business circle, from real estate. He also built hotels, including in New York. They're kind of cut from the same cloth. They speak a language that is mutually understandable to each other. There isn't a drop of ideology in them. You can't spot any ideas in them at all. Neither of them cares at all whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Only one thing matters: interest. I think that, as one of my well-informed interlocutors said, when Witkov came and told Donald Trump that we have a chance to get $150 billion from Russian money for some kind of joint fund, I think Trump said, go for it, great. $150 billion is exactly the kind of money you don't just find lying around. This, I think, is the main point here. Trump acts like a businessman. Not like a statesman, not like a diplomat. He has his own interests, and he strictly follows those interests.
Very soon, American politicians will enter the race for voters' favor. Senate elections are scheduled for November of next year. Currently, the Republicans have a 3-seat advantage in this government body. Just the other day, Marjorie Taylor Greene, until recently a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, resigned, and journalist Don Bacon announced his intention to follow her example. And this means that Donald's party risks losing its majority even before the midterm elections.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The West is attacking. British troops are ready to break into Ukraine. £100 million and English generals in Ukraine are preparing a decisive strike. Germany is equipping Kyiv with long-range missiles and more. The Kremlin is getting nervous. Spain is coming in with millions in European aid, and the Ukrainian armed forces are receiving superweapons. Ukraine is under international protection. Britain, the US, Germany, and Spain are joining forces against the aggressor. I'll share all the details next. This is Ukraine Today with Renata Aslanova, bringing you the latest events. Britain is raising the stakes. London is essentially assembling a strike force for Ukraine right in the midst of a new round of peace talks. After the summer reconnaissance operations, the UK now knows exactly which troops will enter, where they will be stationed, and what exactly they will do. Everything is clearly within the framework of a coalition of 30 countries led by Britain and France to support Ukraine in the event a peace agreement is reached.
We conducted reconnaissance in Ukraine. That's why we know which units we will use, we know how we will deploy them, and we know what roles they will perform.
Gilly stated directly that the plans will be coordinated with allies and adapted to the real situation in Ukraine and to the terms of the future agreement.
These plans mean that when peace comes, we will be ready. The plans will include the possibility of deploying British troops to Ukraine to help ensure this peace in the long term.
What will this massive mechanism look like? Britain is preparing for a rapid deployment of troops, including training Ukrainian fighters right inside the country. Coalition forces will be managed by a group under the command of British 2-star generals. At the same time, the Black Sea Operational Group of Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania is expanding to clear sea routes and demine ports. Meanwhile, US military delegations are holding talks in Kyiv as part of a new attempt to resume peace negotiations. Britain is already allocating £100 million for initial expenses related to troop deployment should a ceasefire actually occur. In addition, Britain is allocating another $17 million to Ukraine for its energy system, while simultaneously putting pressure on Moscow regarding Russian LNG maritime shipments. London remains Ukraine's main partner and our chief lobbyist on the international stage. And this is just the beginning of what the Foggy Albion has already sent to Ukraine and what it is still preparing to deliver. All the details are coming up in the report.
Because of its weak position on the front, Russia is attacking critically important facilities in Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure destruction and casualties among the population. Over the past day, Russian forces have attacked energy facilities in several regions of Ukraine. Restoration work is ongoing at the sites of the strikes. A very important aspect in this matter is the energy assistance from the United Kingdom. The country, understanding the situation, has allocated more than €14 million.
Putin is trying to plunge Ukraine into darkness and cold as winter approaches. These treacherous strikes are not only an attack on Ukraine's security, but also a threat to the economic stability and growth of the United Kingdom.
London has announced the allocation of additional funds for carrying out vital repair work in Ukraine's energy sector to help Ukrainians this winter.
Russia has made Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure a target in this war. Now, as we enter the cold winter, they are intensifying their brutal attacks on energy and heating networks, while Putin tries to intimidate the Ukrainian people. However, Ukraine continues to demonstrate exceptional resilience despite all the hardships.
Funding for restoration will ensure uninterrupted lighting and heating in the homes of Ukrainians, as well as in hospitals and schools.
We are grateful to the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Keir Starmer for extending humanitarian and energy support to Ukraine and for the announced energy assistance package. At a time when Russia is increasing the number of attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure, such solidarity is extremely important.
London continues to put pressure on Russia through sanctions as well. It has announced new restrictions for the Kremlin, which will be gradually implemented throughout 2026. This is a continuation of sanctions against oil giants Putin's allies Rosneft and Lukoil.
These strikes pose a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to the economic stability of the United Kingdom itself. Ukraine's security is our security. Together with our G7 partners, we stand side by side, supporting Ukraine and overcoming all challenges.
From the very first days of the full-scale war, the United Kingdom became one of Ukraine's key strategic partners, not only supplying weapons, but also creating effective financial and institutional support mechanisms of support.
The United Kingdom will continue to decisively apply our financial sanctions as part of our broader response to Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine.
The United Kingdom has established an important system of military assistance to Ukraine, financing innovative funds, international partnerships, credit mechanisms, and support for the Ukrainian defense industrial complex.
It is Russia, not Ukraine, that should pay for Putin's illegal war. The use of Russian assets to strengthen Ukraine's air defense. Our right to Ukraine's security is critically important to us.
The UK Ministry of Defence has signed contracts with companies for the maintenance of armoured vehicles, the production of artillery shells, and the repair of transferred weapons. These contracts provide for the deployment of repair facilities on Ukrainian territory. It was the United Kingdom that became one of the first countries to supply Ukraine with high-precision missile weaponry. A real breakthrough was the decision to provide long-range Storm Shadow missiles. In 2023, the British government announced the transfer of cruise missiles capable of striking targets at distances of more than 250 kilometers. Storm Shadow became the first long-range missiles received by Ukraine, and they were immediately used to strike strategic targets in the occupied territories. This month, the armed forces of Ukraine received a new batch of Storm Shadow missiles. The United Kingdom provided the Ukrainian armed forces with protective gear, vehicles, communications equipment, demining support, as well as assistance with maintenance, technology, and digital transformation. Britain became the first country to announce plans to supply Ukraine with main battle tanks. As part of the Challenger tank deliveries. Challenger 2 tanks and ammunition for them were received as well. The British tanks were supplemented with specialized repair and recovery vehicles, which made it possible to ensure their technical autonomy and use. In 2025, an agreement on a century-long partnership was signed between Ukraine and Britain. This comprehensive document establishes long-term cooperation between the two countries in the areas of defense, economy, energy, justice, science, culture, education, healthcare, and social policy. Britain's assistance is long-term. That is why we can always count on the support of a reliable partner.
Germany is also joining the arms race for Ukraine. Chancellor Friedrich Merz confirms that long-range missiles will be delivered to Ukraine. The legendary anti-aircraft systems have already arrived, and that's not all. Spain is coming in with an unprecedented aid package. Details on the latest Ukrainian military technology coming up next.
Even more aid and support. The German Chancellor has promised to equip the Ukrainian army with long-range weapon systems. However, Merz did not disclose details about the number of missiles or the delivery timeline.
For months, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government on implementing long-range fire projects, as we technically call them. The Ukrainian army will be equipped with such weapon systems.
At the same time, the Chancellor refused to answer a question about Germany's previous reluctance to supply Ukraine with Taurus long-range cruise missiles. He described this approach as a tactic to increase pressure on the aggressor country, Russia.
The operational capability of the Taurus missiles is directly and significantly dependent upon the extensive level of training and expertise of the technical personnel involved. Consequently, this clearly implies that only highly qualified Bundeswehr servicemen are authorized to effectively utilize these advanced Taurus missiles. Furthermore, providing comprehensive training for Ukrainian specialists to achieve this necessary proficiency will undoubtedly require a considerably extended period of time and dedicated effort.
Germany is the largest European donor of military aid to Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war, the government has provided Ukraine with more than 50 billion euros in aid. In September, Berlin launched a new initiative to procure long-range drones jointly with Ukraine's defense industry. Germany will also allocate an additional 150 million euros to purchase weapons from the US for Kyiv.
Germany is well aware of the possibilities of direct military confrontation with the Russian Federation. That is why it is deeply invested in ensuring the defense capability of the Ukrainian state and accordingly in the technical rearmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Air Force has strengthened its air defense with the new British Terrahawk Paladin weapon system. The number of units delivered has not been disclosed, but even a small batch of such systems will significantly enhance Ukraine's air defense.
For the Ukrainian side, this means creating a so-called focal air defense system to protect key logistical and military facilities from being struck by the enemy's aerodynamic means. First and foremost, this refers to UAVs. This system is mobile and accordingly can be redeployed as needed to any location, and given its autonomous use, this significantly increases the Ukrainian side's ability to counter threats as well as those from the Russian Federation.
Spain will also allocate 615 million euros to support Ukraine, the lion's share of which is specifically earmarked for military needs. Primarily,
this is a program for additional arms purchases for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine from the United States. The second is, accordingly, the strengthening of Ukraine's air defense systems. And accordingly, this concerns the nature of logistical and technical support, including the transfer by the Spanish side of heavy armored vehicles and strike systems that are currently in service with the Spanish army.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies which are already being used at the front. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased tenfold.
Ukraine has scaled up the production of the Bogdana self-propelled artillery systems to 20 units per month. These are record figures even for NATO countries. A distinctive feature is that the modified 155mm caliber is a NATO standard, plus accordingly the price-to-quality ratio, and in addition, Ukraine's defense forces have increased artillery shell production and have done so to a record level. We're talking about scaling up the production of both FPV drones and, accordingly, strike drones with a target engagement range of over 1,500 kilometers.
Earlier, Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that the production of domestic weapons, particularly ballistics and drones, is one of the key tasks for the authorities and manufacturers.
It is also worth noting the scaling up of the production of electronic warfare systems and radars. In this segment, once again, the Ukrainian defense industrial complex holds one of the leading positions in the world, and accordingly the production of naval drones as well.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weaponry capable of destroying important enemy military targets deep behind the front lines.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez announced his country's plans to allocate 615 million euros in military aid to Ukraine within a month. More details on how Madrid is helping Kyiv in the war against Russia can be found in the following report.
Spain plans to provide Ukraine with a new aid package worth 817 million euros. It is expected to be approved within a month, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez announced.
We are an ally and a friend of Ukraine, and it is a great honor for us to welcome Zelenskyy at the Moncloa Palace and, in a broader sense, to express our love for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government. When Ukraine was in dire need of surface-to-air missile systems in 2023, there was a lot of bargaining going on. They were deciding who would provide what. The Spanish government was the first to give us their Hawk SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, that had been held in storage for some time. And the Hawks, these formidable defense systems, including the Spanish ones, all demonstrated a very high level of effectiveness.
This aid includes 300 million euros as part of the security agreement, 100 million euros under the Pearl instrument, for the purchase by NATO countries of weapons for Ukraine in the US, and 215 million euros under the EU SAFE instrument, for the purchase of equipment to counter drones as well as radars and other hardware.
The United States is no longer actively helping Ukraine, right? The United States is now ready to sell various weapons and military equipment to European countries, even if those nations ultimately end up transferring them to Ukraine, potentially for their ongoing defense efforts.
As part of this cooperation, Spain will purchase 40 missiles for the Iresti air defense systems, which are in short supply for Ukraine during the winter period.
Historically, Spain has consistently been a highly capable manufacturer of various weapons, including small arms and robust armored vehicles. It would be a significant mistake to completely write them off. In the context that the quantity, and to some extent the quality, of weapons produced by the Spanish has decreased over the past decades, but this is a general European trend.
It was also announced that our country will engage in comprehensive cooperation with the Spanish in the field of air defense. In Madrid, 5 bilateral documents were signed, including a memorandum of understanding on industrial cooperation in the field of security and defense between Spanish and Ukrainian companies.
The Spanish people may not always be like that. They are not typically loud, but they do genuinely help, especially when you politely ask them for assistance.
During his visit, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy thanked Spain for its support of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, particularly for the military assistance provided since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And what do you think about the deployment of foreign contingents to Ukraine and the assistance from Western partners? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come.